So we have talked about demand. So now we are going to move to supply. So before we start with the supply, there's one thing I always want to highlight. So we take two things as given. Okay, this is similar to demand. First, since we take given is the price, is a price. Let me write it here. This is right in the middle, price. Price are given. Okay, meaning so we don't know where the price is coming from. We just take the price falling from the heaven, and then the price is a signal. It's a signal in the sense when the supplier observes the price, they are going to decide what they're going to do. And then the supplier is going to study how the supplier respond to this signal. Okay, so this is a signal. Okay, this is a signal from the market. But toward the end of today's discussion, you're going to see how this price is going to form. Right? Number two, so when we look at the supply, we are going to leave demand as given. Right here, demand as given. So the two things are given, meaning, so the demand is going to behave as it should be. There's no interaction between the supply and the demand. But later, as you're going to see, so when there's a change in supply, usually it's going to cause a change in demand, vice versa. But for now, we just exclusively focus on supply. And essentially, so we're going to look at how supply, more specifically, how the quantity supplied is going to respond a signal from the market. You know, what is the signal from the market? Which is the price. Where price coming from? Let's be patient. Let's just wait. Okay. Great. So supply is going to represent the behavior of a seller. So the key word is behavior. What is the behavior? Essentially, is how they are going to change the quantity supplied when they observe a different signal. What is signal? Price. To summarize, supply or the supply curve is going to show how quantity supplied responds to price change. But what is quantity supplied? So this is similar to quantity demanded, right? So there are two things. First, let me erase those things. There are two things in terms of understanding quantity supplied. So this is for a given price, a signal. The supplier willing to and able to. There are two things. One is willing. The other is able. Willing means they are going to make a profit. Able to meaning so they have the capacity, they have the technology. They are able to produce certain things at a certain price. It could be the case that they don't have the capacity. Regardless how much you pay them, they're not able to produce. Next, so maybe just beyond their technology frontier. Right. So this is how we define a supply curve. Now I'm going to show you an example to understand the supply. Okay. So we start on the right hand side. This is a table like we've seen before. So we are going to look at a supply schedule for a particular commodity. But you feel free to change something you like. Right here we look at a cotton. We're going to see how quantity supplied is on this column. Quantity supplied. How the quantity supplied is going to respond to price. Again, this is a signal. Let me write down signal. So this is a signal from the market, right? So market send you the signal, and then so you're going to respond. How you respond is going to respond by adjusting quantity supplied. This is a quantity you are willing to and able to. All right. So now clearly you can see when the price falls, if you start from top to bottom, when price falls, the quantity supplied is going to fall. Actually, this is called law of supply. And why there's law of supply is very intuitive. Okay? It's because, so when the price falls, you're going to make less profit, but this is going to come out in a few slides. I'm going to leave that for the future slide. But for now, just intuitive think about it. So if the price fall, your revenue is going to fall. Revenues fall, your profit is going to fall. Profits fall, and then your incentive to supply is going to fall. So that's why lower price, lower quantity supplied. So we are going to put all the data in this table, in this diagram. Okay? And then so we'll end up with those dots. We connect those dots, we are gonna get supply curve, right? So clearly the supply curve is upward slope, meaning when price increase, quantity supplied increase. When quantity falls, the quantity supplied fall, right? So summarize, so this supply curve just describe the behavior of the supplier when price change, when they observe a signal from the market, how they are going to adjust the quantity supplied. Okay. Now, like we did in the section for demand, we are going to study the difference between change in quantity supplied versus change in supply. Right. So what is change in quantity supplied? So essentially it's a move along the curve. Right? Like say for example, when you move from, right, so let's wait for a second. Say for example, you move from this dot to this dot. That's called A versus B. What is behind the move? The only possibility is price. You observe a different price and then you change the quantity supplied. The supply itself doesn't change. Okay, so this is a move along the supply curve or change in quantity supplied. The only cause is the price of the goods itself, nothing else. On the contrary, if there's a change in supply, the curve is going to move, right? The curve could move to the right, or it also could move to the left. It's going to mean different things. But now you can see the curve is going to differ, meaning so at the same price, you're going to supply different quantity. Or if you want me to supply the same quantity, you're going to offer me different price. My willingness or able to supply is going to change. Right. So now let's see two possible shifts of the supply curve. On the one hand, the curve could shift to the right. And usually this means there's increase in supply. How we understand this increase in supply? There are two ways, like we discussed earlier for demand. Number one, if we keep the price. Now, if you compare S1 to S2, the quantity supplied is going to increase. It's going to increase from this triangle to this circle. So in that sense, you are more likely to supply, or you are willing to supply a larger quantity. So supply increase. This is conditional on price is given or fixed. Now, alternatively, you can think about if it's erase, it's easier to see. This is one, okay? Now, alternatively, you say, okay, so if I want to keep the quantity, okay? If I want to keep the quantity. Now, under S1, you must provide me with a much higher price. This goes to here. Okay, a triangle. Now, under S2, I'm willing to provide at a much lower price. Okay, is circle. Right? So that means my ability to provide the same quantity increased dramatically. Right? To summarize, so the curve shifts to the right. There are two ways to understand the increase. Fixed price, I'm going to supply much larger quantity. Fixed quantity, I'm going to demand lower price. So that's why the curve shifts to the right is increasing supply. Right? But on the other hand, if the curve shifts to the left, and then opposite to what we just discussed happen. Meaning, so keep the price, so I'm going to supply much lower quantity. Keep the quantity, I'm going to demand much higher price so that I can supply. But in either case, that's going to indicate there's a demand in supply. Right? So the curve shifts to the right, left is increase, shift to the right is a decrease. Right? This is a shift. Next, we are going to study what can cause the curve to shift or what causes curve, what causes supply increase or decrease. Like we did in the case for demand, first I'm going to list all these factors. And in the following slides, I'm going to explain them one by one. So this factor includes the input price. What's input price? Or what is input? Essentially is what you need to produce. Like a raw material, labor. We also going to see how the price of related goods or service is going to change the supply. And the technology, expectation, finally, the number of producers. Each of them has impact on supply. Now let's go to the first one. Input price. To understand how input price can affect the supply. So I'm probably going to write down an equation. Okay. For the supplier, what they really care is what? What a supplier cares when they make their supply decision. Or the business, what they really care is there. Fundamentally. What they care? Profit, exactly. Okay, but in modern days now, they may care about other issues like ethical, like social, right? So, but fundamentally, so they care about the profit. Okay. So I'm going to use pi to denote profit. Actually, this is usually what we do for economics. Okay, we use lots of Greek letters. Pi usually is reserved for profit. Okay, pi is profit. So then profit is going to determine on two things, right? So what determines profit? Number one is going to depend on your revenue. It's called REV, revenue, minus cost. So this is usually how we derive profit, right? But then, so what gives you profit? What gives you revenue? Usually revenue has two parts, right? One is P, price, times quantity, right? Okay, and then cost essentially is what? Essentially minus the cost of input, right? So now, if the cost of input or price of input, if these things fall, what this means to the firm, if they don't adjust their behavior, or what does that mean to the supplier? If they don't adjust their behavior, that means price is going to increase. If price increase, as we start our discussion, so the firm or the supplier cares about the profit. They are trying to maximize profit. If profit increase, and then they are going to provide more. Or in other words, supply is going to increase. So that's how the price of input will affect the supply. And usually the price of input falls, they are going to increase the supply, or the supply curve shifts to the right, and vice versa. Okay, so actually it's coming from this simple equation. Okay. Now let's look at the example. In this example, it asks you what will happen to the number of new business if the government reduces the fee and red tape associated with new business license. So here there are two things. Number one, new business. Number two is red tape and fee. To answer that, or actually to connect with the title of this slide, first we need to identify what market we are talking about for this example, or what supply we are talking about. So this is the supply of a new business. Okay. Now, what are the input matters to the supply of new business? And in particular, follow this question. There's some costs, like administrative costs, right? You need to have the paperwork. You need to go dealing with some bureaucrats, right? And in this case, red tape actually refers to bureaucrats, refers to some transaction costs. Okay, or means there's like lots of procedures you need to go, lots of steps, lots of government agencies you need to deal with. If those things reduce, meaning the input cost of providing a business decrease. What that means? That means immediately the supply of new business is going to increase. Right? That's why, so inside the United States, there are states was competing for new business. Like significant recently in Michigan, right? So it was trying to revive their economy. So they, at some point I hear from a advertisement from NPR, they say they have the lowest steps to register your new business in the United States. And then in the international market, so like a different country, so they're advocating, so they have a lower tax, they have easier bureaucrats to deal with to encourage new business. But then, so why they want to advocate or why the government trying to attract new business is because usually new business generates jobs, generates growth, generates tax revenue eventually. Right? Okay. So on the other hand, what happens if fees rise? And clearly, so that's going to make supply of a new business more expensive. The demand, the supply is going to fall. Right? This is a first factor, input price. Now we have another example. Okay. When the price of cotton drops, the supply of blue jeans will increase. Why? Because cotton is the main input for blue jeans. Right? Okay, so here I want to highlight it. So when we talk about the supply at this moment, we isolate any change could potentially happen in demand. As a matter of fact, so when the price of cotton drops, it could lead to the demand for jeans to change. It also could happen is at the same time is there's some taste of preference change such that the demand for blue jeans will change. For now, let's just isolate those. We just exclusively focus on supply. Right. This is the first factor. Now we look at second factor. We are going to study how change in the price of related goods or service, how those things is going to affect the supply. And here is going to be very similar to the discussion for demand. Remember, so when demand, we talk about substitutes versus complement. At the end, so there's the way we define substitute or complement is by looking at how the price change affects the quantity, right? To be precise, so what we did there is we are going to look at how P1 change affects Q2. Okay. How P1 change affects Q2. P1 affects Q2. Now let's see so how substitutes, or in terms of let's see how in the supply side, the substitutes change the supply of the good itself. But first we need to understand what does substitute means in supply. Just give you an example. Okay. Soybean and corns, they are substitute in production. It's a little bit different from demand. So in demand, when we say substitute, meaning so you are indifferent between consume A versus B. So in that sense, soybean and corn, they are not really substitutes, right? Because usually people have some preference versus soybean or corn, right? But in production, and particularly if we think about state of Nebraska, if you have farmland, usually you either grow soybean or you grow corns. So in that sense, so there's opportunity cost for you to grow soybean and vice versa. And they are substitute in the sense, okay, you can either grow one or the other. All right. So now let's see so how the price of soybean changes how the change in price of soybean affects supply of corn. Let's say if the price of soybean increase, if that increase soybean, how would that affect the supply of corn? there's an intermediate step, right? So that's going to lead to Q1, which is soybean in the example, okay? So soybean, the supply is going to what? Going to increase, right? Because it's more profitable. It's going to increase. You're going to supply more. Now, if you decide to grow more soybean, and then you must give up what? You must give up corn, right? So that's going to naturally is going to fall. As a matter of fact, to the supply side, this is similar to the demand side at this point. Now, and then what you care or what you really can control is Q1 plus Q2. Right, so you either increase Q1, which is soybean, or you increase Q2, which is corn. You cannot increase both. You have limited resource. You need to substitute one for the other. Right. So this is substitute. Now, what is complement in production? That just means you produce A, immediately you're going to produce B. So the example I have may not be perfect. Okay, so it just says, okay, if you produce pork, and usually immediately you're going to produce lard. Right, so these two just come together. Right? Okay, so how would that affect? I mean, if the pork price increase, how would that affect the supply of lard? It's going to move in the same direction because the price of pork increase, you supply more pork, but immediately you're going to, or automatically you're going to produce more lard. Right, so because these two just go hand with hand, you just produce them together or automatically. So this is complement versus substitute. As you can see, so the price of one change is going to lead to the supply of the other into different direction, depending on which goods we are talking about. Now we go to the third factor, which is changing technology. So what is technology? In this background picture, so this is the new way to plow your land or to harvest or to grow. So this represents technology. But this is probably the technological innovation 100 years ago, in the beginning of 20th century. Today, we are in the age of a new, different technology innovation, right? So if you follow the news, so you probably heard about what's happening between Google and Microsoft in terms of their search engine. You probably heard about chatbot, no, not chatbot, ChatGPT, right? So this is like AI-powered chatbot. But actually, it's more than just chat. Actually, so this ChatGPT is AI-powered, essentially providing some search or provide you some analysis. And so right now, what they're capable is, so if you throw these ChatGPT questions, you can be very complex questions, right? So then we ask these chatbots, so what is comparative advantage? So what's the direction of globalization? So most likely they are going to give you some more detailed explanation than I have provided you in the classroom. But this is ChatGPT, right? And this is a new technology. Okay, this new technology can potentially disrupt how we work, how we produce. And then, so that's going to have profound impact in terms of supply. Actually, so the market already see the impact. Like yesterday, the Google share price plunged by more than 8%. As a response, because people was worried about so Google is going to lose their edge in terms of search. And what caused that disruption, or what caused this plunge in the share price? Is because Google, as a response to this chatbot, ChatGPT, so they introduced new search engines called BARD. It's B-A-R-D. So what does BARD means in English? Essentially, it's like conversation, like childlike conversation. Okay, so it's kind of this Google's answer to ChatGPT. But then yesterday, but first of all, in the first place, so it seems like BARD didn't do well after some experience, after some customer experience. And then yesterday, Bing introduced their own version of upgraded search engine. Right? As a matter of fact, Microsoft invests in early stage of this OpenAI, who is the founder of the ChatGPT. And then the market feel So the Google is going to lose their market share or it's going to lose their technological edge. Right. So that's the story. Anyway, so we are in another potential disruptive technological change. This is going to profoundly affect how we produce, how we work. I just give you an example how technology can change supply. Right. Usually, technological advance is going to shift the supply curve to the right. Why? Because they are able to produce or they're able to supply at a lower price, or at the same quantity, they're going to be able to provide at a lower price or produce at a lower price. As the curve is going to shift to the right. Or better here, to summarize, a technological innovation lower costs and increases supply. Like say for example, the ChatGPT is going to make many things cheap, right? So you probably don't need some like professionals to answer some of your questions. You can simply type and then just give you the answer. Like say for example, so we are approaching the tax season, and then you have many specific tax questions. You can just ask this ChatGPT is going to give you very detailed answer instead of you go to some local tax advisor, right? Now, next factor is change in expectation. To understand how changes in expectations affect supply, there are two things. Number one, there's a condition. If the producer can store their goods, or alternatively, if they have the option to postpone or to change the production plan. But in reality, not any producers has the luxury. Let's say, for example, if someone's growing some fruits like strawberry, right? So this strawberry may not be able to store for a long period of time, say, for example, a few months. And you can just store for a few days, maximum months. I don't know how long it really can last. It's impossible to store for another year. Another example, oil field, once they start to extract, okay, and then this problem is going to be very expensive and very disruptive. They just stop to extract for a few days, right? But here, we are going to abstract away from those complications. Just focus on if the producers are able to adjust their supply accordingly or flexibly. Now we're going to see how the expectation change their supply. And then specifically, we're going to focus on price. Now, if the producer expects the price is going to rise in the future, how they affect the supply? In the case of demand, if you are expecting the price is going to rise in the future, and usually what you're going to do, you are going to demand a lot to avoid paying higher price in the future. But from the supply side, their response is going to be different. If they are expecting higher price in the future, what they're going to do, they are going to reduce the production, postpone the production. Why? Because they want to benefit from higher price in the future, right? So this is how change in expectation or how expectation affects the supply. To summarize, sellers or producers, they will adjust their current production based on their expectation regarding to the direction of future price. So the reason why they do that is trying to maximize their profit, trying to obtain the highest possible price so that they can increase their profit. Remember, I showed you how the profit is calculated. It's going to depend on price times quantity, and then minus input cost, right? So then they're going to timing, they're going to find the best timing to supply. Okay. Another example, windmill production increase if producers expect sales and profitability to increase. Last year, so the US government passed a law, it's called Inflation Reduction Act. So actually, so this government act or this law is not necessarily is about inflation. It has a large part is about renewable energy. Right. So one of the big items in these big legislatures is they encourage American firms to bring back the production or bring back the job that produce significant EV, renewable energy, battery. Okay, so the way they encourage is they are going to give you carrots and sticks. Meaning, so if you bring back those jobs or you produce your EV domestically or inside the United States, you're going to get some subsidies. On the other hand, so if you just use materials produced outside and import and assemble your EV car, you're going to pay a fine. But this immediately has impact on the supply for certain things. If you get an EV, so if you get a GE or like Tesla, they're going to expect so the sales is going to rise, the price is going to rise because the demand from households is going to rise, and then the supply is going to rise. Right. Another example. So there are several states already announced in 10 or 20 years they are going to stop sell gasoline powered car. That's going to bring the expectation. So eventually the demand for EV is going to rise. According to the supply of EV car is going to rise. Right. So those are examples show you how the expectation, how the direction of our economy is going to change the supply. Right. So those are two examples. Now there's another example. So back in 2017, there's one particular toys becomes a headline news, right? Which is fidget spinner. So if any of you played that in a few years ago, you probably know what happened. And here, this is these figures show you what happened. At the beginning of 2017, nobody knew about this. But then so in the April or early May, this thing became the headline. So for the total toy sales in the United States is online, right? To be precise, online sales. Fidget spinner counts 20% of the total value or volume. I forgot. So probably it's like a value. So you can see it's become a hot commodity. Actually, so this sudden change in taste and preference just caught most of the retailer off guard because they don't have the inventory to satisfy the demand. As a matter of fact, most big retailers usually they plan ahead. They have lots of inventory to satisfy the demand. But certainly, if there's change in taste and the preference, and then they are going to face a high cost. How to get rid of this inventory, right? In some sense, it's very difficult to predict the direction of the market. So this is a particular case. It's almost impossible to predict. But usually they able to, like say, for example, so they're going to plan for Christmas, right? So they're going to plan for the Super Bowl, right? Now, the last factor that's going to matter to the supply curve, or it's going to shift the supply curve, is the changes in number of producers. Why the number of producers can change is because entry and exit. What does entry and exit means? Entry means entry just means that some new business comes in. That's going to imply more sellers in the market. That immediately means there's going to be an increase in supply. On the other hand, exit means someone to leave the market, and then there's a lower supply, decreased supply, right? And then you may wonder, so why the entry and why the exit? Let me give you an example, and then you understand. So why the entry and exit? Let's use smartphone as an example. Okay. So Apple introduced iPhone 2007. In 2007 or shortly before 2007, does anyone know who are the major players in cell phone market? Have you guys heard about Nokia, Ericsson, You probably never heard about Ericsson, right? So Ericsson is a dominant player along with Nokia. And then so they have another brand like LG, Samsung. Okay? The phone back then is very different. And in 2007, Apple introduced iPhone. They just changed the game. But first you can see so Apple is an entry, it's a new player. Because before that, Apple did not produce any cell phone. They only have iPod. Okay, so this is an example of entry. But then to answer the questions I just raised, why Apple decide to enter this market? It's because they think there's profit to make. On the other hand, there's an example of exit. So like you don't know what Ericsson is. Essentially, it's because Ericsson eventually lost their edge, lose the market, and then leave the market. There are many examples in this market, right? So another example is BlackBerry, right? So this company basically went bust. And then there's another brand, it's called HTC. HTC is also a very prominent player in the early stage. Actually, HTC made the first Google Android phone. HTC has been helping Google to make their phone for several years at the very beginning. So their phone was very high quality for some reason. So they did not keep up with the gauge, then leave. So these give you examples what does entry and exit means and why there was entry and exit. Entry largely because they have some technology innovation. So they think there's profit to make. And exit means usually they lose their age and then they feel so there's no more profit to leave, no more profit to make, right? But this entry and exit, what that means to the supply is it's going to change the total supplier. It's going to shift the supply either to the right or to the left. Okay. Finally, give you a final example. CD. So this basically just disappeared, right? How many of you ever used CD before? Very few, right? So these things basically just disappear, right? Because the technology progress. Now you can see, so the market is just basically collapsed. Right, so now we just close this part by looking at individual supply versus aggregate supply or market supply. Okay, so the discussion is going to be similar to demand. We started with one individual, okay, one individual business. So this first individual business has a supply curve, and this supply curve follows all the property we just discussed, law of supply. Okay, and then the several factors affect the curve to shift left or right. Right, we just talked about 5 different factors. Now we look at second business. Okay, also follow the same property we just discussed. Like I said in demand, so we like number 2. 2 is going to represent many, and this is the simplest possible number to represent many. We are going to bring them together or add them together, sum them together. We sum them together, that's going to give out the market. Okay, I want to emphasize this is a very rare occasion that macro or market is a simple summation of micro. Okay, in just a few lectures, I'm going to give example to show you why macro is not a simple summation of micro. Let's just wait for a few lectures. For now, because this is a simple summation. Okay, sorry. Because this is a simple summation. This means this market supply or market supply curve, to be precise, is going to keep all the property we have discussed regarding to individual supply. This includes law of supply. This includes the factors affect the supply and the direction how the supply curve shift. So this is regarding the supply. Now we move forward to equilibrium. And here we are going to answer the following questions. The first and the most urgent question is, what determines price? remember when I introduced demand and supply, the first thing I emphasize is, so we just take those as given. We don't know where price comes from. We are going to wait. This is number one. Then number two, price essentially is a signal from the market. Price is going to lead everything, or price is going to guide everything. Number two. Okay. Now, number three, so here, so the way we present the following lecture is going to answer a series of questions. So maybe I'm going to write those questions and then so explain to you one by one. But make sure, so here we are going to focus on P, because once we know P, everything becomes clear, right? Why I say that? Because if we look at demand side, so the demand side, it says it's going to summarize by what? What is going to summarize the demand side? Demand curve, exactly. So demand side is summarized by demand curve, and demand curve essentially is to describe the behavior of demand, right? What's the behavior of demand? Essentially is how they're going to respond to price change. Where price coming from is what we can understand, answer. Similarly, what is summarized supply side? Supply curve. What is supply curve? It should describe the behavior of the supply. What is the behavior of supply? How they're going to respond to price change. Where price coming from? This is what we can answer. Okay, so now, so in terms of understanding the price and eventually just open this black box. So we are going to study the following questions. And the answer to those following questions is going to help us understand this mystery. Okay, so the first question is going to be, so what is equilibrium? Okay, first I'm going to define these things. This is number one. And then number two, so I'm going to answer why we care about this equilibrium. Okay, let me erase. Okay, first question, what is equilibrium? Let's call E. Actually, this is going to give you the price. Sometimes we call it P star, number one. Number two, so why we care about E, to be precise. Okay, so I'm going to give answer. And the short answer is that, so regardless where you start from in the market, and eventually you're going to end up with E. So that's why we care about E. This is a short answer. Now, once we answer the second question, we're going to the third question, right? So why we end up with E, okay? Or alternatively, or maybe like fourth question is what's behind the mechanism? Okay, there are four questions. All those questions point to the mystery or trying to demystify P. Okay, so why I say demystify P is because when we study demand and when we study supply, in both cases, we take P as given. We don't know where's P. Once we know P, everything is going to be clear, right? Because once you know P and you look at the supply and find the quantity supplied, when you look at demand, in given P, you're going to find the quantity demanded, right? So all the mystery or all the question will be focused on P. And then so here at least 4 questions. So that's how we understand P, right? So what is the P in this particular E, and why we care about this particular E is equilibrium, and why we end up with E eventually, and what's behind the movement. So that's how we are going to study the rest of this lecture. All right. So now let's just clear these and then so just answer this question one by one. Question number one, what is E? Right, so that's the first question I asked, right? So E essentially is the equilibrium. And E, when we reach this point E, you have this equality. You have quantity supplied equal to quantity demanded. What this means? It just means, so the buyers and the sellers, they're gonna match perfectly. Everyone needs is gonna find someone sell. Everyone sell is gonna find someone demand. Okay, so this is in a perfect match. This is the first question. So this is simple. We just define. Or in the graph, this E is given by the cross between supply and demand. Okay, so or in other words, is given by this dot. But clearly there are so many dots we can potentially study in this diagram, right? So for example, you can look at this dot, or you can look at this dot, or this one, or this one. But we are exclusively interested in the middle one. And what is the middle one? Like I said, this is the equilibrium. This is the first question. What happens in equilibrium? Supply meets demand. This is question number one. Now, question number two, why we care about E? What do you think? Why we care about E? I mean, you read this. Why? I'm going to only focus on this point E.
Because it's best for everyone.
Yes, it is best for everyone. This is one reason. And alternatively, or more fundamentally, is because regardless where it starts, you will end up with here. And by the way, here we probably should focus on price. When I say regardless where it starts from, either you start from here or start from here, you'll end up with here. Or like triangle, start, whatever. And first, okay, so here there's like one thing I need to clarify. Why I say, okay, so we focus on this line or this dimension, because this is like two dimension, right? Price and the quantity. Why we focus on price? This is because price is a signal. Okay, either the demand side or supply side. Once they observe this signal, they know what to do, right? So that's the only thing left unexplained. Is it clear? Okay, so now we are going to look at price, but certainly there are so many prices. Now, the reason why we interested in this particular price or this one is because regardless where you're from, eventually you're going to end up with here. So this is my answer to the question 2. Now we go to the third question. The third question is why? Why eventually you end up with $1 in this example? Or in general, why you end up with equilibrium price? All right. Okay. So those are the question number 3. So now to answer question number 3, to answer question number 3, now I want to remind you a short video we watched at the beginning. So this video is about equilibrium. And this is, we use example of the flower market in Netherlands, in Amsterdam. Okay. And so in that example, they have a clock. Now just imagine we are sitting in that trading floor. There's a clock. All right. So say for example, the clock starts from 0. Okay. And then, so this is 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, so on and so forth. All right. So just imagine we are in that trading floor. Okay, for a moment. And furthermore, let's say for example, so this is what we knew about demand and supply in terms of the flower. Okay, even though here is written as cotton, they just say, okay, this is flour. And then, so there's a trading flow. Now let's see the why we are going to end up with point E, or why the clock, or in other words, why the clock is going to stop at here, regarding where you're from. So that's what we're going to achieve. Is this clear? So my statement is, okay, regardless where the clock starts, just imagine there's a hand of the clock. Okay, so you can think about, so when you just go to the I don't know, so there's like some place you have this, what do you call it? So you just push, and then so the hand is going to, it's like a lottery. What do you call? You understand what I'm saying? So there's some place arcade. So there's things you just push the hand, and then just randomly, huh? Yeah, it's like it's fortune wheel, no? Is that fortune? Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so just imagine here. So here, my claim is this one I'm trying to explain to you. Okay, very important. So just imagine, so there's someone just push these things. Okay, regardless where you start from, and eventually this is going to stop at here. There's some magic. Not even explain to you why. Okay, so before I explain to you why, let's just study this a little bit. Demand and supply for either side. There are two things are crucially important. One is the demand curve or supply curve, because that's going to describe their behavior. Two is the price. To be precise, is their perceived price. You understand what does perceived mean, right? Or you guess the price. Is it clear? Why? It's because just imagine, okay, again, just imagine we are sitting in the trading floor, and then we have this watch, right? And then so you are going to base on this watch to tell the price. But before everyone starts, you must have a guess. Or in general, wherever you go shopping or go to do trade, or any market you go, usually you have a price in your mind, yes or no? Your guess, right? So if you decide to buy a cell phone, you have a budget, right? $500, that's my budget, or like 1,000. If you sell something, so for example, you're making, I don't know what's your hobby, right? So for example, sometimes I just took like photos for my son, so because he's like swimming team. So for example, he just becomes like a professional photographer, and then so I may charge like, say for example, $50 per hour. If someone only offer me like a 30, I probably rather just stay at home. Just to give you a sense. Similar here, flower market. So everyone must have the price in your mind before you enter the market. Now how the game starts. The clock starts with some random number, right? Because you don't know what's the price. Now let's say, for example, the clock started with 0.5. Again, so it can be anywhere, all right? So the clock can be anywhere in this wheel. If the clock starts with 0.5, that means everyone walk into this trading floor, think the price is going to be $0.5, saving that per pound or whatever you like to call. And then now, so this supply curve and demand curve, this we already knew. This is how your behavior is going to look like. And then now, so look at here, what this means. If the clock is here, and for the moment, just imagine if the clock suddenly stop or freeze at 0.5, what would happen in this trading floor? There's some flower planter, some buyers, some grow flower, some demand flower. I guess now we are in a very relevant time because Valentine is coming, right? So people grow a lot of flower, and a lot of people demand flower. Now, based on this supply and demand, if the stock stop at 0.5, what happened in this trading floor? And what means or which direction we are going to move. First, start with what happens if the price 0.5. Again, this is a random number. It can be any number. What do you think? It's 0.5. So what happens to demand and supply? There are maybe, so we can put some number, 8 supplies and we have 14 demand. Meaning what? Meaning someone, so meaning there's lots of demand. There are lots of buyers will go home disappoint their wife or husband, right? But will they leave with some disappointment? Or do they have any urgent, or do they have any incentive to push the clock around it? Yes, right? And in which direction do they wish the clock to run? To this direction or this direction? Or clockwise or counterclockwise? Huh? No. Clockwise, right? Why? We're very good. So we are getting the clock running. So they are willing to, the clock is run clockwise, meaning higher price. Why? Because they don't want to disappoint their husband or wife or their customer. They need the flour. The clocks keep running, right? Okay. So keep in mind, so I just start with a random number, right? So this is 0.5. And then what is particular about 0.5? It's just too low, right? So as a matter of fact, as long as you start the number below this one, you're going to see the same things. Or in other words, as long as you this side of the clock, then the clock is going to keep clockwise running, right? Because there's sentiment. Okay, so the next question is, what is this sentiment? Or what is the momentum? Anyway, so now we go to the other side. If the clock is suddenly is too much, turn to, say for example, turn to 1.5, meaning we are going to here. Now what happened? Opposite, right? So suddenly, so you have more supplier willing to sell the flour. Again, just remind yourself the video we watched in this trading floor. So basically it means, okay, so if there's clock move to 1.5, and then there's many suppliers, so their muscle memory is going to what? It's going to click, right? Remember the watch, okay? And then suddenly a lot of supply. Now, what happened? Supply is going to exceed demand. Remember, we are in a flour market. If the clock suddenly stops, first, flour is very perishable. The secondly, Valentine just in a week or less than a week. After that, the demand is going to collapse. If you cannot sell your flour, you are going to let your flour perish, right? And then, so clearly, so there's something is going to push the clock counterclockwise. Does that make sense? And why the clock run counterclockwise? Because there's someone desperately trying to get rid of their flour, right? Okay. Well, in other words, as long as you are in this region, so the clock is running, let's just to be precise, the clock is going to here. Maybe it's okay. So the clock is going to counterclockwise, right? And here's clockwise, right? Until, so the clock hit 1.0. Once the clock hit 1.0, and then, so the market is going to close, right? Why? Why the market is going to close? There's 2 reasons. Number one, everyone get what they need. Buyer and seller, number one. Number two, so the clock is not going to move. Why? If the clock just move to clockwise, the people is going to resist. If we move to counterclockwise, it's also other people to resist, right? Once we reach 1.0, and then so the market is going to clear. Now the last question. Now we understand, right? So how these things move, right? So the last question. So we clearly see, so there's something like push this clock, right? Clockwise or counterclockwise, it's pushing. But what is the force behind the movement? What is pushing this clock move toward 1.0? What is the attraction? What is that? We mentioned about that earlier in the introduction. Anyone remember what is that? What is attracting the clock or the hand? The clock hand in this example. Stop at 1.0. Some hand, huh? Yes, it's profit. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So that's just yeah. But so it is related. Yes. Yes, I'm talking about invisible hand. So there's invisible hands. It's going to lead this clock hand to 1.0. But to precise, what is invisible hands? And he mentioned profit. So that just means from the supply side, so they are doing their best. They're trying to maximize their profit. From the demand side, they're also doing their best. They're trying to get what they need, right? So that's why when the clock is running too high, mean the price too high, the supply side is willing to provide more. On the other hand, if the clock is too low, meaning the demand side cannot get what they need, they're willing to pay more. So either side is going to behave on their best interest. They are rational. They are maximize their profit or maximize their well-being in economics, meaning the happiness. Everyone is maximize their own objective. So that is invisible hands. That's how the clock is going to magically stop at 1.0 in this example. And to summarize, that's how we get a price. Remember how the story starts. So we look at the supply side and demand side separately. And each side will take the price as given. They don't know. But once you bring them together, and then suddenly they are going to collectively determine the price. And they are going to determine the price such that no one is going to complain. Not only no one going to complain, no one is willing to change. Because anyone change, even a tiny bit, is going to worse off. So that's the magic. That's invisible hand. Okay. What's behind invisible hand? Everyone behave on their best interest. All right.